I have seen people walk into my courtroom angry, embarrassed, broke, arrogant, and completely convinced the world owed them an apology, but I had never seen a woman break a courtroom bench and then try to sue me for it. Her name was Karen Whitmore, and the moment she stepped through those doors, I knew this was not going to be a normal case. Not because she looked dangerous, not because she looked nervous, because she looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Like the courtroom was a stage, and she had already rehearsed the performance in her head. She was dressed in a cream-colored designer jacket, sunglasses pushed up into her blonde hair, a large handbag hanging from her arm, and a face full of outrage that did not quite reach her eyes. That is something people miss. Real pain shows up before the mouth opens. Real fear sits in the shoulders. Real humiliation shakes the hands. Karen had none of that. She had strategy. Across from her stood Daniel Brooks, the building manager of a small apartment complex where Karen had been renting for 8 months. He was not loud. He was not dramatic. He stood there with a folder pressed tightly against his chest, the way honest people sometimes do when they are afraid their truth will not sound as powerful as someone else's performance. Karen was suing Daniel for emotional distress, public humiliation, and what she called unsafe courtroom seating. Now listen carefully to that last part. Unsafe courtroom seating because, according to Karen, the bench inside my courtroom had collapsed under her because it was defective, poorly maintained, and, in her words, clearly not designed for respectable women. The courtroom went quiet when she said that. Not because it made sense, because everyone heard what she was really trying to do. She wanted to turn an embarrassing moment into a payday. She wanted to blame the court, blame the building manager, blame anyone except herself, and I could see Daniel's jaw tighten when she spoke. He had the look of a man who had been bullied by paperwork, emails, complaints, threats, and fake outrage for months. Karen was not just suing him over a bench. She was trying to destroy his reputation, his job, and his peace of mind. I asked her one simple question. Mrs. Whitmore, what exactly happened before the bench broke? She blinked just once, but I saw it. That tiny pause told me she had not expected the word before. Guilty people love to start the story at the moment they look like the victim. Innocent people start at the beginning. Even when the beginning is messy, Karen lifted her chin and said she had simply sat down like any normal person. But Daniel lowered his folder, and for the first time I noticed his hands were shaking, not from fear, from restraint. Because he knew something she did not know I was about to ask for. The courtroom camera footage. The thing about a courtroom is that people think the truth only lives inside documents. It does not. Sometimes the truth is in a pause. Sometimes it is in the way a person looks away too quickly. Sometimes it is in the silence that comes after a question they were not prepared to answer. Karen Whitmore had come in ready to control the room. She had that polished kind of confidence I have seen many times before. Not confidence built from honesty, confidence built from believing everyone else is too tired, too nervous, or too intimidated to challenge you. Daniel Brooks was different. He was not trying to win a performance. He was trying to survive one. I asked him how long he had known Karen, and he took a breath before answering. That breath told me there was history here. Not one incident, not one broken bench, a pattern. He explained that Karen had moved into one of the apartments he managed and almost immediately began filing complaints. The hallway smelled wrong. The parking space was not wide enough. The neighbors walked too loudly. The mailboxes were emotionally stressful. Every week, there was a new accusation, and every time Daniel tried to resolve one, another appeared. Karen smiled while he spoke. That smile bothered me. Innocent people do not usually smile when someone describes months of stress. They interrupt. They shake their head. They defend themselves because the accusation hurts. Karen did not look hurt. She looked entertained. Then Daniel opened his folder and showed copies of emails, dozens of them. Some were demanding refunds. Some threatened legal action. Some accused him of discrimination, harassment, negligence, and public cruelty, all in the same paragraph. I looked at Karen and asked, "Did you write these?" She said. "I was advocating for myself." That is a phrase people use when they want bad behavior to sound noble. Advocating for yourself is not the problem. Threatening people until they are exhausted is. Then Daniel told me about the morning the bench broke. Karen had arrived at the courthouse already angry because Daniel refused to pay her $4,000 for what she called emotional inconvenience. She had been pacing near the seating area, speaking loudly into her phone, telling someone she was about to make them all pay. The spectators shifted when he said that Karen's face changed. Not much, just enough. Her lips pressed together. Her eyes moved toward the evidence screen. Her hand tightened around the strap of her handbag. That was when I knew she was not afraid of Daniel's words. She was afraid of what might prove them. I asked Daniel whether anyone else had seen what happened. He nodded. Then he looked straight at Karen and said, "Yes, Your Honor." And the bench did not just break. The courtroom held its breath. It was kicked first. When Daniel said the bench had been kicked, the entire courtroom changed. You could feel it. There are moments when a room full of people hears a sentence and suddenly understands that the case they thought they were watching is not the real case at all. This was not about a broken bench anymore. This was about control. It was about a woman who had built a story around one dramatic moment and expected everyone to ignore what happened before it. Karen turned toward Daniel slowly, not shocked, angry. That is an important difference. Shock opens the eyes, anger narrows them. Shock asks questions. Anger attacks the person speaking. She pointed at him and said, "That is a lie. He is only saying that because he hates strong women." I leaned forward. I have heard that kind of sentence many times. It is not a defense. It is a distraction. When someone cannot answer the fact, they try to change the category of the accusation. Suddenly, it is not about conduct. It is about identity. It is about feelings. It is about making everyone afraid to ask the next question. But I am not afraid of the next question. I asked her, "Did you kick the bench?" Karen looked directly at me and said, "Absolutely not. Too fast. People think quick answers sound confident. Sometimes they do. But when the question is serious, innocent people usually process it. They show confusion. They wonder why they are being accused." Karen answered before the question had even settled in the air. Daniel then explained what he saw. He said Karen was pacing beside the courtroom bench, angry that the case was not being called quickly enough. She was complaining that the court was wasting her time. Then, according to him, she struck the wooden base of the bench with her heel. Once, then again, not hard enough to destroy it immediately, hard enough to loosen something that was already under pressure. Karen laughed under her breath. That laugh was a mistake, because the young woman sitting behind her, Emily Carter, raised her hand slightly and asked if she could speak. Now, I do not allow my courtroom to become a circus. People do not just jump into cases because they feel like talking. But there are times when a witness appears naturally, and you can tell by their face they have been holding something in. Emily looked nervous. Her voice trembled. But her eyes stayed on Karen. She said, "I saw her do it," and then silence. Karen's confidence cracked for the first time? Not completely. People like Karen do not collapse right away. They recalibrate. They search for the next angle. She said Emily was confused. She said Daniel probably coached her. She said everyone in the courtroom was against her. But while she was talking, I noticed something disturbing. Daniel was not looking at Karen. He was looking at the court officer near the evidence monitor because the footage was ready. I have always believed that evidence has a special kind of power, not because it is loud, because it does not care how charming you are. It does not care how offended you sound. It does not care how many dramatic words you use to make yourself look wounded. Evidence simply stands there and waits for the lies to walk into it. Karen did not know that yet. She was still speaking when I raised my hand. The courtroom went still immediately. Even Karen stopped mid-sentence, her mouth slightly open, as if she had just realized the room no longer belonged to her. I turned to the court officer and asked for the footage to be played. That was when Karen's posture changed. Before that moment, she had been leaning forward, chin high, shoulders stiff, full of accusation. The second the evidence screen came on, her shoulders dropped. Her eyes moved toward the monitor, then towards the exit, then back to me. Guilty people often look for doors before they look for facts. The footage started quietly. No drama, no shouting. Just a clear view of the courtroom seating area before the case was called. There was Karen pacing upon in her hand, talking loudly enough that even without audio, you could see the attitude in her body. Her free hand kept cutting through the air. Her steps were sharp and restless. Daniel stood several feet away, trying not to engage. Then Karen turned toward the bench. She looked around once. That little glance mattered. People look around before they do something they know they should not do. Then she struck the base of the wooden bench with her heel once. A few spectators gasped. Karen whispered, "That proves nothing." The footage continued. She kicked it again, harder. Then she sat down heavily, almost throwing herself onto the bench with a frustrated movement. For a second, nothing happened. Then the side support shifted. The bench tilted. Karen grabbed the armrest, slipped sideways, and the courtroom bench cracked underneath her weight. The room reacted all at once, not with laughter, with shock. Because now everyone understood why Karen had been so desperate to control the story. She had not been injured by a defective bench. She had created the danger, then tried to sue the people she blamed for it. I looked at Karen. Her face had gone pale under the makeup. But even then, she tried to recover. She said the video was misleading. She said she was testing the stability because she feared the bench was unsafe. She said any responsible citizen would have done the same. That is when Daniel finally opened the last section of his folder. And his voice changed. He said, "Your Honor, that was not the first time she tried something like this." Then he placed another document on the table, a prior claim, same pattern, different building, different broken property, same woman. When Daniel placed that prior claim on the table, Karen's entire expression hardened. That was the moment the case stopped being embarrassing and became serious, because one broken bench could be a mistake. One dramatic lawsuit could be poor judgment. One exaggerated story could come from panic, anger, or shame, but a pattern. A pattern tells you who someone is when they think nobody is watching. I picked up the document and read it carefully. 16 months earlier, Karen had filed a complaint against another property manager named Paul Henderson. According to that report, a lobby chair had collapsed without warning after Karen claimed she sat down. She demanded money for emotional distress, public embarrassment, and unsafe furniture. The wording was almost identical. I looked up slowly. Karen was staring at the floor now, not crying, not confused, not offended, calculating. Daniel then handed over a second page, a settlement email. Karen had demanded $3,800 from Paul to make the situation disappear quietly. The courtroom murmured. I did not need to raise my voice. I only had to look over my glasses, and the room went silent. Karen suddenly became emotional. Her voice cracked. She said everyone was twisting her life against her. She said strong women always get punished when they speak up. She said she had suffered humiliation that nobody could understand. But there was one problem. Her tears came only after the pattern appeared. That is something I never ignore. Real emotion usually arrives when pain is mentioned. False emotion often arrives when consequences get close. Then Emily Carter, the witness from the gallery, spoke again. She said Karen had whispered something before the bench broke. I allowed her to repeat it. Emily swallowed hard and said, she said, watch this. Now they'll have to pay. And then silence. That sentence hit the courtroom like a hammer. Karen snapped her head around and yelled that Emily was lying. But the more she shouted, the more she proved what I had already seen. She was not defending truth. She was trying to punish exposure. I turned back to the evidence screen and asked the officer to pause the footage at the exact moment before the second kick. There it was, Karen's face. A small smile, not fear, not concern, not caution, a smile. That was the viral moment. The entire courtroom saw it at the same time. Daniel covered his mouth. Emily looked away. Even the spectators froze, because there is something chilling about watching a person smile right before creating damage they planned to blame on someone else. Karen had walked into my courtroom asking for justice, but the footage showed something very different. She had walked in hunting for a payout, and now every lie she brought with her was sitting on that screen. I looked at Karen Whitmore for a long moment before I said a word. Not because I was unsure, because sometimes silence does more work than a lecture ever could. Karen had come into my courtroom believing volume would protect her. She believed outrage would confuse the facts. She believed if she used the right emotional words, the room would forget what the evidence showed. But a courtroom is not a theater, and justice is not paid out to the loudest performer. I told her exactly what the evidence proved. She kicked the bench. She created the instability. She sat down in a way that turned her own conduct into damage. Then she filed a claim against people who had not harmed her, hoping embarrassment could become money. Her lawsuit was dismissed. Immediately, then I turned to Daniel Brooks. I could see the exhaustion in his face. Months of accusations had worn him down, but in that moment his shoulders finally lowered. Not because he had won money, because someone had finally seen the pattern clearly. I awarded Daniel court costs and damages connected to the broken bench, because accountability does not disappear just because someone calls themselves a victim. Karen tried one last time to interrupt. I stopped her. I told her that being embarrassed is not the same as being wronged. Falling is not always someone else's fault. Breaking something before blaming others for it is not courage. It is manipulation. The courtroom was completely still. Karen's face changed again, but this time there was no performance left to hide behind. Her lips trembled, her eyes lowered. For the first time all day, she looked less angry than exposed, and that is a very different kind of silence. Before she left, I gave her one final warning. The law is there to protect people who are truly harmed, not to reward people who create harm and then sell the story as suffering. Daniel gathered his papers slowly. Emily wiped her eyes. The spectators did not clap, did not cheer, did not laugh. They just watched Karen walk out of the courtroom with the same handbag, the same sunglasses, and none of the control she had arrived with. I have never forgotten that case, not because of a broken bench, but because it reminded me how dangerous a polished lie can be when it meets tired, decent people who do not know how to fight back. That day, the truth did not shout. It appeared on a screen. It showed a heel striking wood, it showed a smile before the damage, and it taught everyone in that courtroom one simple lesson. You can break a bench, you can bend a story, but sooner or later, evidence breaks the lie. If this case shocked you, hit subscribe for more courtroom stories like this. And tell me in the comments, was Karen truly embarrassed, or was this all a plan set up for money? I want to hear your opinion.